The fluorescent lights of the 42nd floor hummed their familiar tune as Thaddeus Grimwald pushed his cleaning cart through the empty corridors of Meridian Financial Tower. At 3:47 a.m., downtown Denver was a ghost town, and the only sounds were the distant hum of air conditioning and the rhythmic squeak of his cart's wheels against the polished marble floors. For most people, working as a night janitor at 53 would represent failure or desperation. But for Thaddeus, every shift was another opportunity to continue the search that had consumed his life for the past 5 years, finding the password to a Bitcoin wallet that contained what was now worth over $15 million. He methodically cleaned each office, but his mind wasn't on emptying trash cans or vacuuming carpets. Instead, he was mentally reviewing the thousands of password combinations he had already tried, searching for patterns or forgotten details that might unlock the digital fortune that had been tantalizingly out of reach since 2019. "Still here, Thaddeus," called Serafina Cross, the security guard who made her rounds through the building every few hours. At 62, she had worked building security for over a decade and had developed a maternal concern for the quiet janitor who always seemed lost in thought. "Just finishing up the executive suites," Thaddeus replied, pausing in his work to acknowledge her presence. "How's your night going, Serafina?" "Same as always. Quiet enough to be boring, busy enough to keep me awake," she said, with the practiced humor of someone who had learned to find entertainment in routine work. "You know, I've been watching you for 3 years now, and you always look like you're thinking about something important. Everything okay?" Thaddeus appreciated Serafina's genuine concern, but he'd never told anyone about his Bitcoin situation. How could he explain that he was potentially one of the wealthiest people in Denver, but couldn't access his fortune? Because he'd forgotten a password he'd created during a period of his life when he'd been drinking too much and making poor decisions. "Just the usual stuff," he replied diplomatically, thinking about the future, wondering if things might change someday. The truth was more complicated and more painful than Serafina could imagine. In 2013, during the early days of Bitcoin's emergence into mainstream awareness, Thaddeus had been working as a computer programmer for a tech startup that was experimenting with cryptocurrency payments. He'd been fascinated by the technology and had invested $3,000, a significant portion of his savings at the time, in Bitcoin when it was trading for around $200 per coin. The investment had been prescient, but his personal life had been chaotic. He'd been going through a difficult divorce, dealing with depression and alcohol abuse, and making impulsive decisions that he later regretted. When he'd created the Bitcoin wallet to store his cryptocurrency, he'd used a complex password that seemed clever at the time, but had become incomprehensible once his mental state improved, and his memory of that period became hazy. By 2019, when Bitcoin's value had increased dramatically, Thaddeus realized that his forgotten investment was worth over $1 million. But despite having the wallet file and knowing approximately when he'd created the password, he couldn't remember the specific combination of words, numbers, and symbols that would unlock his fortune. The next 5 years had been spent in an increasingly desperate search for the correct password. He'd tried everything he could think of: significant dates, names of family members and pets, song lyrics, book quotes, random combinations based on his interests from 2013. He'd even hired a computer expert to run automated password-cracking software, but the complexity of the password had defeated even sophisticated computational approaches. The obsessive search had cost him his programming career, his apartment, and most of his relationships. Friends and family had grown tired of hearing about his lost Bitcoin fortune and had begun treating him like someone with a gambling addiction or delusional thinking. His ex-wife, Evangeline, had been particularly unsympathetic, telling him that his fixation on the lost cryptocurrency was just another example of his inability to accept reality and move forward with his life. "You're chasing fairy tales," she told him during their last conversation. "That Bitcoin is gone if it ever really existed. You need to stop living in fantasy and start dealing with your actual situation." But Thaddeus knew the Bitcoin was real. He had the wallet file, he could see the balance when he accessed it, and he could track the wallet's address on the blockchain to confirm that the cryptocurrency was still there, waiting for someone with the correct password to claim it. The problem was that someone appeared to be him, but a version of himself from 11 years ago who had been drunk, depressed, and creating passwords with a logic that his current self couldn't decipher. As he finished cleaning the executive offices and prepared to move to the next floor, Thaddeus pulled out the worn notebook where he recorded his daily password attempts. Tonight's efforts had focused on combinations involving his childhood dog's name, his first girlfriend's birthday, and lyrics from songs he'd been listening to during the difficult period in 2013. None of them had worked, just like the thousands of previous attempts recorded in his notebook's pages. "Thaddeus," Serafina called as she finished her security check of the floor, "I don't mean to pry, but you've seemed more preoccupied than usual lately. If you ever want to talk about whatever's bothering you, I'm a good listener." Her offer was genuine and kind, but Thaddeus knew that explaining his situation would only make him sound delusional or obsessed. How could he tell someone that he spent every free moment trying to remember a password that would unlock millions of dollars when he was working as a janitor and living in a studio apartment that he could barely afford? "I appreciate that, Serafina. Really," he replied. "It's just some old business that I've been trying to resolve. Nothing dangerous or illegal, just complicated." As he watched her continue her security rounds, Thaddeus reflected on how his Bitcoin search had become not just a financial quest, but a psychological battle with his past self. Every failed password attempt was a reminder of how his alcoholism and depression had sabotaged his future, and every day that passed was another day when the cryptocurrency's increasing value made his locked fortune even more tantalizingly out of reach. But tonight felt different somehow. As he cleaned the offices and continued his mental review of possible password combinations, Thaddeus had the strange feeling that he was close to a breakthrough, not because of any specific evidence, but because 5 years of obsessive searching had finally created enough mental pressure that something would have to give. The password was in his memory somewhere, buried beneath years of guilt, regret, and wishful thinking. He just needed to find the right combination of circumstances, emotions, and memories to unlock not just his Bitcoin wallet, but his recollection of who he had been during those chaotic months in 2013. As he pushed his cart toward the elevator to begin cleaning the 41st floor, Thaddeus didn't know that tonight would be the night when his 5-year search would finally end, but not in the way he had expected, and with consequences that would change his life far beyond just recovering his lost fortune. 3 weeks later, Thaddeus found himself cleaning the offices of Blackwood and Associates, a law firm that specialized in estate planning and business dissolution. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was emptying trash cans for lawyers who helped people manage fortunes, while his own wealth remained locked behind a forgotten password. As he cleaned attorney Cornelius Ravencroft's office, Thaddeus noticed a peculiar collection of items scattered across the desk: photographs, personal documents, and what appeared to be old computer printouts that someone had been reviewing before leaving for the day. One photograph caught his attention immediately. It showed a group of people at what appeared to be a technology conference, and among the faces, he recognized someone he hadn't thought about in years: Marcus Whitmore, his former colleague from the startup where he'd first learned about Bitcoin. The photograph was dated 2013, and Thaddeus realized he was looking at documentation from the exact period when he'd created his Bitcoin wallet. But why would a law firm have photographs and documents from a tech conference that had taken place over a decade ago? As he continued cleaning, Thaddeus discovered that the documents scattered across the desk were related to the dissolution of Meridian Tech Solutions, the startup where he had worked before his life fell apart. Apparently, the company's remaining assets were being distributed to former employees as part of a legal settlement that had taken years to resolve. More intriguingly, the documents included a list of former employees who were entitled to claim various business assets, and Thaddeus's name appeared on the list as someone who was owed back pay and potentially other compensation. But the most significant discovery was a manila folder labeled Employee Computer Files, Digital Asset Recovery. Inside were printouts of emails, computer backup records, and what appeared to be password recovery information for various former employees who had left personal files on company computers. Thaddeus felt his heart racing as he realized what he was looking at. If Meridian Tech Solutions had maintained backup records of employee computer files, they might have captured his Bitcoin wallet creation process, including passwords or password hints that he had forgotten over the years. The ethical implications of what he was considering were clear. He was contemplating taking confidential legal documents from an attorney's office, but the potential to finally recover his $15 million Bitcoin fortune was overwhelming his normal moral constraints. He quickly photographed the relevant pages with his phone, focusing on any documents that mentioned digital asset recovery or employee computer files. The information suggested that former Meridian Tech employees could claim their personal files by contacting the law firm and providing identification and proof of employment. Over the next week, Thaddeus researched the legal settlement that was dissolving Meridian Tech Solutions. The company had been involved in patent disputes and financial difficulties for years before finally entering bankruptcy proceedings. As part of the asset distribution, former employees were entitled to claim personal property that had been stored on company computers, including files that might have been backed up to company servers. The discovery gave Thaddeus hope that his Bitcoin wallet creation might have been captured in company backup systems, potentially including password hints, recovery phrases, or other information that could help him unlock his lost fortune. But claiming his files would require contacting the law firm directly and revealing his identity and situation. After 5 years of keeping his Bitcoin search secret from everyone except computer technicians he had hired for password recovery services, Thaddeus would need to explain his situation to attorneys who would have access to legal resources and potentially judgment about his years-long obsession. "Serafina," he said during one of their late-night conversations in the building lobby, "have you ever had something important that you lost and spent years trying to find?" "Like, what kind of thing?" she asked, settling into one of the lobby chairs during her break. "Something valuable that you knew was somewhere, but you couldn't remember exactly where you put it or how to access it," Thaddeus explained, trying to gauge her reaction without revealing specific details about his situation. "My late husband's military medals," Serafina replied thoughtfully. "After he died, I packed up his belongings quickly because I was too emotional to deal with going through everything carefully. I spent 3 years looking for those medals before I finally found them in a box I'd labeled as Christmas decorations. How did that feel, looking for something for so long?" "Exhausting," she said honestly. "And sometimes I wondered if I was holding on to the search because it was easier than accepting that they might be gone forever. Sometimes we keep looking for things because the search gives us purpose, even when the search itself is making us miserable." Her observation hit closer to home than Thaddeus was comfortable acknowledging. Had his 5-year Bitcoin search become more about having a reason to hope for dramatic life change than about actually recovering the cryptocurrency? The next morning, Thaddeus called Blackwood & Associates and spoke with Cornelius Ravencroft about claiming his personal files from the Meridian Tech Solutions dissolution. The process was straightforward. He needed to provide identification, proof of employment, and sign legal documents acknowledging that he was claiming only his personal property. "The digital asset recovery process can take several weeks," Attorney Ravencroft explained during their phone conversation. "We'll need to have our computer specialists extract your files from the company backup systems and verify that everything we're providing actually belongs to you." "Is there any indication of what kinds of files might be available?" Thaddeus asked, trying to control his excitement. "The backup systems captured email accounts, document folders, and some application data from employee computers," Ravencroft replied. "If you created personal files or used personal applications on your work computer, those might be recoverable." 2 weeks later, Thaddeus sat in the law firm's conference room, reviewing an external hard drive that contained everything the company's backup systems had preserved from his work computer during his employment at Meridian Tech Solutions. The files were organized by date and application, providing a comprehensive record of his digital activities during the period when he'd created his Bitcoin wallet. Most of the files were mundane: work projects, personal emails, downloaded articles about cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, but buried in a folder labeled Personal Finance Research was a text file that made his hands shake as he opened it. The file was titled Crypto Wallet Notes and contained detailed information about his Bitcoin purchases, wallet creation process, and most importantly, a series of password hints that his 2013 self had created to help remember the complex password he had chosen. "Password based on childhood plus college plus current situation," the notes read. "Dog name plus graduation year plus favorite song this month plus apartment number." Thaddeus stared at the password hint, his mind racing through the specific details that would satisfy each component. His childhood dog had been named Apollo. His college graduation year was 2001. In 2013, he had been obsessively listening to Johnny Cash's cover of Hurt. His apartment number had been 247, but the hint didn't specify how to combine these elements, whether to use full words or abbreviations, whether to include symbols or numbers, whether the components should be connected or separated. As he sat in the law firm's conference room, Thaddeus realized that he finally had the information he needed to recover his Bitcoin fortune. But he also understood that he was about to discover whether 5 years of desperate searching had been justified, or whether his lost cryptocurrency would remain forever out of reach, despite having the password hints he'd been seeking. The next few hours would determine whether Thaddeus Grimwald would remain a night janitor, obsessed with an impossible dream, or whether he would become one of the wealthiest men in Denver and face the entirely new challenges that would come with recovering a fortune that had been lost for over a decade. Thaddeus returned to his small studio apartment that evening with the external hard drive containing his recovered files, his hands still trembling with excitement and anxiety. For 5 years he had imagined this moment, finally having real clues about his forgotten Bitcoin password. But now that the information was in front of him, he felt overwhelmed by the possibility of both success and failure. The password hint he'd discovered was more detailed than anything he'd been able to remember on his own. Dog name plus graduation year, plus favorite song this month, plus apartment number. His 2013 self had been methodical enough to create a system, but cryptic enough to make the actual password challenging to reconstruct. He sat at his small desk and began working through the combinations systematically. Apollo 2001, Hurt 247. Apollo 01, Hurt 247. Apollo 2001, Johnny Cash 247. Each attempt required him to access his Bitcoin wallet file and wait for the software to process the password, a nerve-wracking few seconds each time before discovering whether he had succeeded or failed. After 2 hours and 37 failed attempts, Thaddeus was beginning to wonder if his password hint was incomplete, or if he was misunderstanding how his past self had constructed the combination. The components seemed clear, but the specific formatting remained elusive. Then he remembered something that made him pause. In 2013, he had been going through his divorce and had become superstitious about the number 13, often incorporating it into passwords and personal codes as a way of confronting the difficult year he was experiencing. He tried Apollo 13 Hurt 247. The wallet software processed for several seconds, then displayed an error message. Apollo 2013 Hurt 13, another failure. Apollo 01 Hurt 13247, still nothing. Thaddeus was about to take a break when he remembered another detail from 2013. He had often used the exclamation point as a way of making passwords more complex, usually at the end of combinations. Apollo 13 Hurt 247. The wallet software processed the password, and for a moment Thaddeus thought it would be another failure. Then the screen changed, and he found himself staring at a Bitcoin balance that made him forget how to breathe. 15.7 Bitcoin. Current value, $15,347,132. After 5 years of obsessive searching, countless failed password attempts, and the gradual destruction of his career and relationships, Thaddeus had finally unlocked his lost fortune. He stared at the screen for several minutes, unable to fully process what he was seeing. The numbers were real, the Bitcoin was accessible, and with a few mouse clicks he could transfer the cryptocurrency to a modern exchange and convert it to conventional currency. But as the initial excitement began to wear off, Thaddeus realized that recovering his Bitcoin fortune was only the beginning of a much more complex process. He had spent 5 years living like someone who had lost everything, and suddenly he possessed wealth that exceeded what most people earned in their entire lifetimes. More challenging was the question of how to handle his newly recovered fortune. Should he immediately sell the Bitcoin and convert it to traditional investments? Should he quit his janitorial job and return to his programming career? Should he contact the family and friends who had grown tired of hearing about his cryptocurrency obsession? Over the next week, Thaddeus began carefully converting portions of his Bitcoin into conventional currency, using multiple exchanges and spreading the transactions over several days to avoid attracting unwanted attention. The process was surprisingly straightforward. The cryptocurrency that had been locked away for over a decade converted easily into dollars that appeared in his bank account like magic. But the more significant challenge was adjusting to the psychological reality of sudden wealth. For 5 years, he had lived paycheck to paycheck, carefully budgeting every expense and deferring any purchases that weren't absolutely necessary. Now he had access to enough money to live comfortably for the rest of his life without working. "You seem different lately," Serafina observed during one of their conversations at the office building. "More relaxed, like some kind of weight has been lifted off your shoulders." Thaddeus realized that his successful password recovery was probably obvious to anyone who had been paying attention to his behavior over the past few months. The obsessive, distracted energy that had characterized his personality for years had been replaced by something that might have looked like contentment. "I finally resolved that old business I mentioned," he replied carefully. "It worked out better than I had expected." "That's wonderful," Serafina said genuinely. "I could tell it was weighing on you. Sometimes holding on to things from the past can prevent us from moving forward with our lives." But moving forward proved more complicated than Thaddeus had anticipated. His first instinct was to quit his janitorial job immediately and return to a lifestyle appropriate for someone with his net worth. But he also realized that his years of desperate searching had taught him valuable lessons about what really mattered in his life. Serafina had shown him genuine kindness and concern during his most difficult period, never knowing that he was potentially wealthy, but treating him with respect and friendship based on who he was as a person. His former colleagues and family members had largely abandoned him when his Bitcoin obsession became too difficult to tolerate, but they would undoubtedly reappear once they learned about his recovered fortune. The question was whether he wanted to return to his previous life and social circle, or whether his years of financial struggle had shown him who truly cared about his well-being versus who was only interested in his success. 2 weeks after unlocking his Bitcoin wallet, Thaddeus made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of immediately quitting his job and returning to his programming career, he decided to continue working as a night janitor, while carefully planning how to use his recovered fortune in ways that would honor the lessons he had learned during his years of searching. "Serafina," he said during one of their late-night conversations, "what would you do if you suddenly had enough money to never worry about finances again?" She considered the question thoughtfully before responding. "I think I'd be scared," she said honestly, "not of having money, but of how it might change my relationships with people. Money has a way of making you wonder whether people like you for who you are or for what you can provide them." Her answer confirmed Thaddeus's instincts about handling his situation carefully. The Bitcoin fortune he had recovered was life-changing, but how he chose to use it would determine whether the change improved his life or simply created new problems. As he continued his janitorial work, while secretly managing a multi-million-dollar cryptocurrency portfolio, Thaddeus began to understand that finding his lost password had been the easy part. The real challenge would be deciding what kind of person he wanted to become now that he had recovered the fortune he had been seeking for 5 years. The obsessive search was over, but a more complex journey was just beginning, learning how to live with wealth in ways that honored both the person he had become during his years of struggle and the opportunities that his recovered Bitcoin fortune could provide. 6 months after recovering his Bitcoin fortune, Thaddeus found himself living an increasingly complex double life. By day, he continued working as a night janitor, maintaining the routine and relationships that had sustained him during his years of searching. But behind the scenes, he was carefully managing investments, charitable giving, and business opportunities that were transforming him into one of Denver's most successful cryptocurrency investors. The decision to maintain his janitorial job while secretly wealthy had initially seemed temporary, a way to ease into his new financial reality while avoiding the complications that sudden wealth might create with his existing relationships. But as months passed, Thaddeus realized that his unusual situation was providing him with insights about money, relationships, and character that he never would have gained if he had immediately revealed his recovered fortune. "You know, Thaddeus," Serafina said during one of their regular conversations, "I've been thinking about our discussion of sudden wealth. I think the hardest part wouldn't be managing the money itself, but figuring out how it changes your relationships with people who knew you before." Her observation was particularly relevant because Thaddeus was experiencing exactly that challenge with family and former colleagues who had remained in his life despite his years of Bitcoin obsession. His ex-wife, Evangeline, had begun calling him regularly, ostensibly to check on his well-being, but actually fishing for information about his financial situation. She had noticed that he seemed less desperate and stressed than he had been during their previous conversations, and she was apparently wondering whether his cryptocurrency search had finally been successful. "You sound different, Thaddeus," she said during one of their phone calls. "More stable, like you finally accepted reality and moved past that Bitcoin fantasy." "Something like that," he replied carefully, not wanting to lie, but also not ready to reveal the truth about his situation. "I'm glad you're finally being realistic about your circumstances," Evangeline continued, Maybe now you can focus on building a normal life instead of chasing impossible dreams." The conversation was both painful and illuminating. Evangeline was genuinely pleased that he seemed healthier and more stable, but her assumptions about why he had improved revealed her fundamental lack of understanding about his Bitcoin situation. She had always believed his cryptocurrency search was delusional thinking rather than a genuine attempt to recover real wealth. More interesting was the behavior of former colleagues from Meridian Tech Solutions, who had learned that he was claiming files from the company's dissolution. Several people had contacted him, supposedly to reminisce about their shared work experience, but actually to discover what he had recovered from the company's digital archives. "Thaddeus," Marcus Whitmore had said during a coffee meeting, "I heard you were able to claim some files from the old company. Find anything interesting in the archives?" "Some personal documents, old project files, nothing particularly valuable," Thaddeus had replied, which was technically true since the most valuable thing he'd recovered was information rather than actual files. "I've been wondering if any of us had cryptocurrency wallets on those old work computers," Marcus continued with forced casualness. "I mean, we were all experimenting with Bitcoin back then. Would be amazing if someone had forgotten a fortune sitting on an old hard drive." The conversation confirmed Thaddeus's suspicion that several of his former colleagues were hoping to discover their own lost Bitcoin fortunes in the recovered company files. But it also revealed that they had no idea his search had been successful. If they had suspected he'd recovered millions in cryptocurrency, their approach would have been much less subtle. Meanwhile, Thaddeus was using his recovered wealth to quietly improve the lives of people who had shown him kindness during his difficult years. He arranged for Serafina to receive an anonymous scholarship for her grandson's college education, funded through a charitable foundation that couldn't be traced back to him personally. He also began leaving unusually generous tips for service workers and making anonymous donations to organizations that helped people experiencing homelessness and financial hardship. But perhaps his most ambitious project was using his Bitcoin fortune to invest in blockchain technology companies and cryptocurrency startups that were working on innovations that could help other people avoid the kind of password-related losses he had experienced. "The wallet recovery technology space is really expanding," explained Ophelia Sterling, a venture capital partner who had become Thaddeus's investment advisor without knowing about his personal history with lost Bitcoin passwords. "There are multiple companies developing solutions to help people recover lost cryptocurrency, but it's still a very specialized field." Thaddeus had invested over $2 million in companies developing cryptocurrency recovery technologies, secure wallet systems, and blockchain-based inheritance planning services. His investments were generating substantial returns, but more importantly, they were funding innovations that could prevent other people from experiencing the 5 years of desperate searching that had defined his recent past. The irony wasn't lost on him that his lost Bitcoin fortune had become the foundation for building an even larger fortune through strategic investments in the very technologies that could have helped him recover his cryptocurrency years earlier. But maintaining his double life was becoming increasingly complicated as his wealth continued to grow and his investment activities expanded. He was now managing over $20 million in various investments while continuing to work as a night janitor, a combination that required careful scheduling and exceptional discretion. "You're one of our most successful individual investors," Ophelia told him during one of their quarterly reviews, "but I have to admit I'm curious about your background. Your investment insights are remarkably sophisticated for someone who claims to be new to cryptocurrency markets." Thaddeus deflected her questions by explaining that he'd been researching blockchain technology as a hobby for several years, which was technically true even if it understated the obsessive nature of his Bitcoin-related research. As his first year of recovered wealth drew to a close, Thaddeus realized that his unusual approach to managing sudden fortune had been more valuable than he'd initially recognized. By maintaining his previous lifestyle while secretly wealthy, he had learned lessons about money, relationships, and personal values that would guide how he used his wealth for the rest of his life. The people who had treated him with kindness and respect when he appeared to be unsuccessful were the same people he wanted to help now that he had the resources to make a difference. The people who had abandoned him during his years of Bitcoin searching, or who were now showing renewed interest in his life, were revealing motivations that would influence how he structured his relationships going forward. But the double life was also taking a psychological toll. Thaddeus was increasingly feeling the strain of maintaining elaborate deceptions about his financial situation while managing investment activities that required significant time and expertise. Eventually, he would need to decide whether to continue his secret wealthy life indefinitely or to reveal his success and deal with the consequences of sudden, dramatic lifestyle change. The Bitcoin password he had searched for during 5 years had unlocked more than just his cryptocurrency fortune. It had opened a window into human nature and relationship dynamics that was teaching him valuable lessons about how to use wealth wisely and how to identify people whose friendship and respect were based on character rather than financial success. The decision to gradually reveal his recovered Bitcoin fortune came when Thaddeus realized that maintaining his double life was preventing him from using his wealth effectively for larger-scale philanthropic and business ventures. After 18 months of secret wealth management, he began carefully disclosing his situation to select people whose reactions would help him understand how to handle broader revelations. His first conversation was with Serafina during one of their quiet nights in the office building, where they had developed their friendship over 3 years of working together. "I need to tell you something that might sound unbelievable," he began, settling into one of the lobby chairs where they often talked during her security rounds. "Do you remember how I mentioned that old business I was trying to resolve? The thing that had been weighing on you for so long?" Serafina replied. "You said it worked out better than expected." "It was Bitcoin," Thaddeus said simply. "I had bought cryptocurrency in 2013 but forgotten the password to access it. I'd been searching for that password for 5 years, and I finally found it about 18 months ago." Serafina looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "How much Bitcoin are we talking about?" "Currently worth about $23 million, Thaddeus replied, watching her expression carefully. For several seconds, Serafina sat in complete silence, processing what he had told her. Then she began laughing, not mockingly, but with the kind of amazed delight that comes from discovering that someone you care about has experienced an incredible stroke of good fortune. "Thaddeus," she said finally, "you've been working as a janitor while sitting on $23 million. I wanted to understand what having that money really meant before I changed my life around it," he explained. "And I wanted to see how people treated me when they thought I had nothing, versus how they might treat me if they knew about the Bitcoin. And what have you learned? That you've been a better friend to me during the worst period of my life than most people were during the best periods," Thaddeus replied. "And that sudden wealth is only as valuable as your wisdom about how to use it." Serafina's reaction confirmed his instincts about character and friendship. She was genuinely happy about his good fortune, asked thoughtful questions about his plans for the money, and showed no signs of treating him differently because of his revealed wealth. But his next conversation, with his ex-wife Evangeline, provided a stark contrast that illustrated why he had been wise to approach revelations carefully. "You're telling me that you actually found the Bitcoin password," Evangeline said during their phone call, her voice carrying skepticism mixed with calculation, "and it's worth over $20 million. "That's right," Thaddeus confirmed. "The search that you thought was delusional thinking was actually successful." "Well," Evangeline said after a long pause, "I suppose I owe you an apology for not believing in your Bitcoin recovery efforts." But the conversation that followed revealed that Evangeline's primary interest wasn't in apologizing for her lack of support, but in determining whether Thaddeus's recovered fortune might affect their divorce settlement or create opportunities for her to benefit from his success. "I've been thinking about our divorce agreement," she said, "and I wonder if there are any legal implications to you recovering assets that existed during our marriage, even if you couldn't access them at the time." Her response confirmed Thaddeus's suspicion that revealing his wealth would attract people whose interest in reconnecting was purely financial rather than personal. Even more revealing was the reaction of his former colleagues from Meridian Tech Solutions when news of his Bitcoin recovery began circulating through their professional network. Marcus Whitmore called within days of learning about Thaddeus's success, suddenly eager to renew their friendship and discuss potential business collaborations. "I always believed you'd figure out that password situation," Marcus said with obvious insincerity. "Your persistence and technical skills made it inevitable that you'd succeed eventually." The conversation was filled with suggestions for cryptocurrency investment opportunities, partnership proposals, and social invitations that had been notably absent during Thaddeus's years of struggle. But the most significant change came in how Thaddeus approached his philanthropic and investment activities. Once he no longer needed to maintain secrecy about his wealth, He established the Grimwald Foundation, focused on cryptocurrency education and recovery technology development, and began funding research projects at universities throughout Colorado. "Your foundation's approach to blockchain education is innovative," said Dr. Arabella Cross, a computer science professor at the University of Colorado who had received one of his research grants. "Most cryptocurrency philanthropy focuses on investment and speculation, but you're emphasizing the practical applications and security aspects that could help ordinary people use digital assets safely." Thaddeus's experience with lost passwords had given him unique insights into the practical challenges that prevented broader cryptocurrency adoption, and his foundation was funding research that could make digital assets more accessible and secure for non-technical users. More personally satisfying was his ability to openly help people who had shown him kindness during his difficult years. He hired Serafina as his personal security consultant, paying her far more than her building security job, while utilizing her years of experience with building management and personnel evaluation. "I can't believe I'm getting paid to help you manage security for your business investments," she said during one of their meetings at his newly purchased downtown office. "6 months ago we were talking in a lobby at 3 in the morning, and now you're consulting with venture capital firms about cryptocurrency startup investments." "The foundation of good decisions hasn't changed," Thaddeus replied. "It's still about understanding people's motivations and being careful who you trust with important information." But perhaps the most important lesson from revealing his Bitcoin recovery was learning to distinguish between people who were genuinely pleased about his success versus those who saw his wealth as an opportunity for their own benefit. The relationships that grew stronger after his revelation were those that had been based on mutual respect and genuine care during his years of struggle. The relationships that suddenly became more complicated or demanding were those that had been superficial or conditional even before his wealth was known. As Thaddeus settled into his new life as an openly wealthy philanthropist and investor, he reflected on how his 5-year search for a lost Bitcoin password had taught him lessons about persistence, character evaluation, and the true value of money that were worth far more than the cryptocurrency fortune itself. The password he had finally remembered had unlocked more than just his digital wallet. It had opened a window into human nature and relationship dynamics that would guide his decisions about wealth, friendship, and purpose for the rest of his life. The decision to gradually reveal his recovered Bitcoin fortune came when Thaddeus realized that maintaining his double life was preventing him from using his wealth effectively for larger-scale philanthropic and business ventures. After 18 months of secret wealth management, he began carefully disclosing his situation to select people whose reactions would help him understand how to handle broader revelations. His first conversation was with Serafina during one of their quiet nights in the office building, where they had developed their friendship over 3 years of working together. "I need to tell you something that might sound unbelievable," he began, settling into one of the lobby chairs where they often talked during her security rounds. "Do you remember how I mentioned that old business I was trying to resolve? The thing that had been weighing on you for so long?" Serafina replied. "You said it worked out better than expected." "It was Bitcoin," Thaddeus said simply. "I had bought cryptocurrency in 2013, but forgotten the password to access it. I'd been searching for that password for 5 years, and I finally found it about 18 months ago." Serafina looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "How much Bitcoin are we talking about?" "Currently worth about $23 million, Thaddeus replied, watching her expression carefully. For several seconds, Serafina sat in complete silence, processing what he had told her. Then she began laughing, not mockingly, but with the kind of amazed delight that comes from discovering that someone you care about has experienced an incredible stroke of good fortune. "Thaddeus," she said finally, "you've been working as a janitor while sitting on $23 million. I wanted to understand what having that money really meant before I changed my life around it," he explained. "And I wanted to see how people treated me when they thought I had nothing, versus how they might treat me if they knew about the Bitcoin. And what have you learned? That you've been a better friend to me during the worst period of my life than most people were during the best periods," Thaddeus replied. "And that sudden wealth is only as valuable as your wisdom about how to use it." Serafina's reaction confirmed his instincts about character and friendship. She was genuinely happy about his good fortune, asked thoughtful questions about his plans for the money, and showed no signs of treating him differently because of his revealed wealth. But his next conversation, with his ex-wife Evangeline, provided a stark contrast that illustrated why he had been wise to approach revelations carefully. "You're telling me that you actually found the Bitcoin password," Evangeline said during their phone call, her voice carrying skepticism mixed with calculation, "and it's worth over $20 million. "That's right," Thaddeus confirmed. "The search that you thought was delusional thinking was actually successful." "Well," Evangeline said after a long pause, "I suppose I owe you an apology for not believing in your Bitcoin recovery efforts." But the conversation that followed revealed that Evangeline's primary interest wasn't in apologizing for her lack of support, but in determining whether Thaddeus's recovered fortune might affect their divorce settlement or create opportunities for her to benefit from his success. "I've been thinking about our divorce agreement," she said, "and I wonder if there are any legal implications to you recovering assets that existed during our marriage, even if you couldn't access them at the time." Her response confirmed Thaddeus's suspicion that revealing his wealth would attract people whose interest in reconnecting was purely financial rather than personal. Even more revealing was the reaction of his former colleagues from Meridian Tech Solutions when news of his Bitcoin recovery began circulating through their professional network. Marcus Whitmore called within days of learning about Thaddeus's success, suddenly eager to renew their friendship and discuss potential business collaborations. "I always believed you'd figure out that password situation," Marcus said with obvious insincerity. "Your persistence and technical skills made it inevitable that you'd succeed eventually." The conversation was filled with suggestions for cryptocurrency investment opportunities, partnership proposals, and social invitations that had been notably absent during Thaddeus's years of struggle. But the most significant change came in how Thaddeus approached his philanthropic and investment activities once he no longer needed to maintain secrecy about his wealth. He established the Grimwald Foundation, focused on cryptocurrency education and recovery technology development, and began funding research projects at universities throughout Colorado. "Your foundation's approach to blockchain education is innovative," said Dr. Arabella Cross, a computer science professor at the University of Colorado who had received one of his research grants. "Most cryptocurrency philanthropy focuses on investment and speculation, but you're emphasizing the practical applications and security aspects that could help ordinary people use digital assets safely." Thaddeus's experience with lost passwords had given him unique insights into the practical challenges that prevented broader cryptocurrency adoption, and his foundation was funding research that could make digital assets more accessible and secure for non-technical users. More personally satisfying was his ability to openly help people who had shown him kindness during his difficult years. He hired Serafina as his personal security consultant, paying her far more than her building security job, while utilizing her years of experience with building management and personnel evaluation. "I can't believe I'm getting paid to help you manage security for your business investments," she said during one of their meetings at his newly purchased downtown office. "6 months ago, we were talking in a lobby at 3 in the morning, and now you're consulting with venture capital firms about cryptocurrency startup investments." "The foundation of good decisions hasn't changed," Thaddeus replied. "It's still about understanding people's motivations and being careful who you trust with important information." But perhaps the most important lesson from revealing his Bitcoin recovery was learning to distinguish between people who were genuinely pleased about his success versus those who saw his wealth as an opportunity for their own benefit. The relationships that grew stronger after his revelation were those that had been based on mutual respect and genuine care during his years of struggle. The relationships that suddenly became more complicated or demanding were those that had been superficial or conditional, even before his wealth was known. As Thaddeus settled into his new life as an openly wealthy philanthropist and investor, he reflected on how his 5-year search for a lost Bitcoin password had taught him lessons about persistence, character evaluation, and the true value of money that were worth far more than the cryptocurrency fortune itself. The password he had finally remembered had unlocked more than just his digital wallet. It had opened a window into human nature and relationship dynamics that would guide his decisions about wealth, friendship, and purpose for the rest of his life. 5 years after recovering his Bitcoin fortune, Thaddeus stood in the conference room of his foundation's headquarters, looking out at downtown Denver, while reflecting on the journey that had transformed him from a desperate night janitor into one of Colorado's most respected cryptocurrency philanthropists and investors. The Grimwald Foundation had become a leading force in blockchain education and cryptocurrency security research, having funded projects that helped thousands of people recover lost digital assets and develop safer approaches to cryptocurrency storage and management. His personal portfolio had grown to over $40 million, but more importantly, his foundation's work was preventing other people from experiencing the years of desperate searching that had defined his own Bitcoin recovery journey. The university partnership program has exceeded all our projections, reported Dr. Ophelia Sterling, who had joined the foundation as Director of Research Development after leaving her venture capital position. We've funded cryptocurrency recovery research at 12 universities, and 3 of them have developed technologies that are now being used commercially to help people access lost digital wallets. But today's board meeting was special because they were announcing the foundation's largest single project, a $50 million initiative to create open-source cryptocurrency recovery tools that would be available free to anyone who had lost access to digital assets. The irony isn't lost on me, Thaddeus told the assembled board members, that my 5-year obsession with finding a lost Bitcoin password has become the foundation for research that could help millions of people avoid similar situations. In the audience, Serafina nodded approvingly from her position as the foundation's security director. She had proven invaluable in helping Thaddeus evaluate the character and motivations of people seeking foundation funding, using the same observational skills that had made her an excellent building security guard to identify genuine researchers versus opportunistic grant seekers. What I've learned, Thaddeus continued, is that the most valuable thing I recovered wasn't the Bitcoin itself, but the understanding of what really matters when you're searching for something important. The audience included several people who had been part of his life during both his struggling years and his wealthy years, providing him with a live demonstration of how differently people related to success versus hardship. Marcus Whitmore sat in the front row, having appointed himself as an unofficial advisor to the foundation, despite having shown no interest in Thaddeus's well-being during the years when he was working as a janitor. His suggestions for foundation projects invariably involved opportunities where he could personally benefit financially or professionally. In contrast, Arabella Cross, the computer science professor, had developed innovative research projects that advanced cryptocurrency security without seeking personal gain beyond reasonable academic funding. Her work was genuinely improving blockchain technology rather than simply capitalizing on Thaddeus's wealth and interest in the field. The most significant lesson I've learned, Thaddeus said as he concluded his presentation, is that losing something valuable can teach you about what was really valuable all along, and it's usually not what you thought you were looking for. After the board meeting, Thaddeus met privately with Serafina in his office to discuss their next phase of foundation development. "You know," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk, "I've been thinking about something you said during those late-night conversations when we were working in the building together." "What's that?" "You said you were thinking about the future, wondering if things might change someday," Serafina recalled. "At the time, I thought you were just hoping your circumstances would improve. Now I realize you were actually planning for how to handle success if your Bitcoin search was successful." "I was mostly just desperate and trying to stay hopeful," Thaddeus replied with a laugh. "But you're right that I spent a lot of time thinking about what I would do differently if I ever recovered that fortune." "And what's the biggest thing you would do differently?" Thaddeus considered the question seriously before answering. "I would be more careful about who I shared my struggles with while I was experiencing them, instead of hiding my problems until they were resolved. The people who were kind to me when they thought I was just a janitor with personal issues turned out to be the people whose friendship was most valuable when I could finally reveal my situation." This insight had become central to how Thaddeus approached both his personal relationships and his foundation's work. He prioritized funding researchers and organizations that demonstrated integrity and genuine commitment to helping others, rather than those who were simply skilled at presenting impressive proposals. "Speaking of sharing struggles," Serafina said, "I've been wondering if you've considered writing about your experience, not just the Bitcoin recovery, but the lessons about character and relationships that you learned during those 5 years of searching." The suggestion was intriguing, because Thaddeus had indeed been thinking about ways to share the insights he'd gained from his unusual journey from obsessive searching to accidental wealth to purposeful philanthropy. "What kind of writing are you thinking about?" "Maybe a book about how losing something can teach you about what's really valuable," Serafina suggested. Your story demonstrates that the most important discoveries aren't always the ones you're actively searching for. 6 months later, Thaddeus published The Lost Password: What 5 Years of Searching for Bitcoin Taught Me About What Really Matters. The book became a bestseller, not because of its cryptocurrency content, but because of its insights about persistence, character evaluation, and finding purpose through helping others. The book tour provided Thaddeus with opportunities to speak at universities, technology conferences, and business schools about topics ranging from blockchain security to personal resilience to the psychology of wealth and relationships. The most common question I receive, he told audiences, is whether I would do anything differently if I could relive those 5 years of searching. The answer is that I would trust the process more and worry less about the outcome, because the search itself was teaching me lessons that were more valuable than the Bitcoin I was trying to recover. As Thaddeus concluded his remarks at the Denver Technology Conference, exactly 10 years after his Bitcoin password recovery, he reflected on how completely his life had been transformed by a combination of technological persistence and human insight. The cryptocurrency fortune that had obsessed him for 5 years had become the foundation for helping thousands of other people. The relationships he had built during his struggling period had become his most valued friendships, and the character lessons he had learned through adversity had become his most valuable life skills. The password I finally remembered, he often told audiences, didn't just unlock my Bitcoin wallet. It unlocked a deeper understanding of what makes life meaningful, and that understanding has been worth more than any amount of cryptocurrency could ever be. Standing on the conference stage, looking out at an audience that included both longtime friends and new colleagues, Thaddeus understood that his 5-year search for a lost Bitcoin password had led him to discover treasures that were far more valuable than the digital fortune he had originally been seeking. The real treasure hadn't been the Bitcoin itself, but the journey of persistence, the relationships forged during struggle, and the opportunity to use recovered wealth in ways that helped other people.